Guys, today a full Haitham guide where I talk about his kit, best teammates, best builds, and so on. Let's go. Haitham is clearly a well-known Dendro DPS, he needs no presentation really. He's still one of the best main carries in the game in my opinion, mainly because of the teams he fits in and also because of how smooth he feels to use. And so, to start off, I want to talk to you about the things about his kit I really like but aren't extremely obvious. First of all, to this day, Haitham is still one of the few characters in the game that can extend the rotations at his liking. To be more specific, Haitham's rotations are purely determined by his mirror projections. These mirror projections are extensions of his ward slashes and they deal Dendro damage. These projections can have up to 3 stacks, and higher the stack count the higher the damage and the Dendro application basically. And the common belief within the community is that Haitham is only good when he is at 3 stacks because that's when his damage is at his ceiling, but that's not actually the case. But let's go back a bit. These projections can be gained in 3 different ways mainly. 1 with a charge or a plunge attack with a 12 seconds cooldown, 2 with his elemental skill that has an 18 seconds cooldown, and up to 3 with his elemental burst that again has an 18 seconds cooldown. Most of the time Haitham will want to start his rotations with 3 projections, and there are 2 ways to gain that many. The first is by using an elemental skill and a plunge attack. Basically, since this skill is an ability that can make you teleport to any spot in range, you can even teleport in the air and use a plunge attack right after. This works best when the skill is aimed just slightly above the surface, because that way the plunge attack will be almost instantaneous. When the plunge hits, a mirror projection will be also automatically activated, and that's why this is a great way to deal a lot of front-loaded damage in a single instance. The second way to get the projections is the elemental burst. The burst will deal damage in a wide range and will also give you 3 projection stacks if you have none at the time of casting. This is very important. The burst will give you 3 stacks only if you have 0 before using it. If you have some before that, the burst will deal more damage but give you fewer stacks after, which is a bad trade-off. Anyway, before the burst gives you the stacks, you have a small window where Haitham has no mirror projections and can only deal physical damage. In fact, you're only getting the stacks when the burst is done hitting opponents, and this is the fun part. In this small window, you can switch out from Haitham to do something else with another character, then switch in with Haitham again before the burst ends, and get the stacks anyway. So it's a great way to use a quick skill from a character like Fischl or Cookie. Either way, the thing with Haitham is that every 4 seconds he loses a projection stack, and unless he has an ability ready to get it again like an elemental skill or a charge attack, he will start dealing less damage. For many, that's the signal that he should stop the rotation, but that's not always the best solution. True, Haitham will start dealing less damage, but that's not useless. That's what I meant when I said that he can extend his rotations if he wants, because unlike somebody like Hutao that has his rotations tied to his elemental skill duration, Haitham is much more flexible. So for example, if you need a little bit more damage to kill an opponent and he has Quicken applied on him, Haitham can squeeze that damage without having the 3 stacks even. This is something that is still very unique in the scope of Genshin. Even in the more flexible DPS like Arlecchino and Neuvillette, I will still say they're more restricted compared to Haitham. Now that I told you what I most like about Haitham, let's see what his best teams are and how he can put this gameplay to shine. Let me remind you that if you enjoy my content but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really makes me notice your support. And also go check my Wuthering Waves channel. Now, when it comes to teams, Haitham is the type of character that basically has access to every team in his niche. That's because not only he can deal nice damage, which is great on Quicken teams, Quick Bloom teams, but his Dendro application is also absurdly unique. This is what's underestimated about Haitham, I feel like. His Dendro application is actually very good. That's because Haitham's Dendro projection attacks can apply Dendro up to 2 times in a single instance. As far as I can remember, nobody else can do this in the Dendro niche, not even Nahida. The effective significance of this is that his Dendro application is very concentrated in a few hits, and in actuality this has both pros and cons. For example, if you play him as a Hyper Bloom driver with 2 off-field Hydro characters like Shincho and Yelan and Cookie as the healer, this is actually kind of a negative. This is because of the internal cooldown Hyper Bloom has. If more than 2 Hyper Bloom are procced at the same time, just 2 of them will deal damage to the opponent. And that's the issue right there. Since Haitham has a very concentrated Dendro application, it will be generating a lot of Bloom Seeds in a single instance. A good chunk of those Bloom Seeds will be wasted because of the internal cooldown, and that's a shame. Note that Nahida also has this issue on these teams, but to a lesser extent because her Dendro application is more balanced throughout the rotation. But there is a different scenario where Haitham's Dendro application is actually very useful, and that's Nilou teams, everybody's favorite AoE composition. Haitham is straight up one of the best Dendro characters for Nilou teams, and that's because his Dendro application is fully taken advantage of here. The reason is that the internal cooldown on Bloom teams works a bit differently than it does on Hyper Bloom teams. Truthfully, this is the case for all the Bloom reactions. Only up to 2 Bloom reactions of a certain type can hit an opponent in a time frame of 0.5 seconds. However, pay attention here, this is tied to the character that is triggering the reaction. For example, let's say you are on a Nilo Bloom team and your opponent is getting hit by 4 Bloom reactions, all of which are getting generated by Haitham. Out of those 4 blooms, only 2 of them are dealing damage. On the flip side, let's say there is another scenario where the opponent is again getting hit by 4 blooms in total, but this time only 2 of them are getting generated by Haitham and the other 2 are getting generated by Kokomi. This time, all of the 4 blooms are dealing damage because the triggers of the reactions are different. This can't apply on Hyper Bloom teams because on those teams there is only one trigger and that's the Electro character you have. So this is the reason that Haitham is very good on Nilo teams. The variant I like the most of this team is Haitham, Nilo, one between Xingqiu and Yan'an, and one between Baizhu, Yaya or Kirara. Very good composition where you get a lot of hydro application and plenty of healing or shielding. Still, this is not to say that Haitham is a bad driver of Hyper Bloom or Burgeon teams, it's still pretty decent there, just penalized due to this internal cooldown thing. Then come his more common teams, which would be Quick Bloom teams. Just to explain this to people that don't know this yet, Quick Bloom teams are compositions where you combine a lot of Hyper Bloom triggers with pretty consistent quicken uptime on opponents. If you want both of these things to happen, the hydro application on your team should be contained, because triggering a bloom reaction on an opponent removes his quicken status. Basically, triggering too many blooms could remove quicken completely from the equation. And that's what happens when you play a quick bloom team with Xingqiu. His hydro application is just too much, and that means that the quicken uptime on opponents will be close to 0. Even with just Xingqiu as the hydro applier, like a single hydro applier, the hydro application will just be too much and the quicken uptime will be non-existent. If you play Yelan instead of Xingqiu, the situation becomes a bit better because her hydro application is lesser compared to Xingqiu's, but still it's high enough that the quicken uptime won't be optimal. Honestly, between Yelan and Xingqiu, it's a wash here, because Yelan's composition does a bit more damage since Yelan provides some damage amplification for the active character, but Xingqiu's composition provides more durability thanks to Xingqiu's defensive utility. Probably most people prefer Xingqiu, because having more defense is better than having a tiny bit more damage. Anyway, Fontaine introduced a new character, Furina, that improved the Quick Bloom teams for Haitham. That's because Furina's lower hydro application per second compared to Yelan and Xingqiu, which means that with her own team, the quicken uptime will be more consistent. I made a dedicated video about this team specifically, where I went much more in depth than I do here, but the core idea behind this composition is that you use Haitham, Furina, Cookie as the healer and the Electro trigger for the Hyper Blooms, and then Nahida or Baizhu. Baizhu if you want even more heals, because Cookie is a single target healer and so she's kind of limited for Furina teams. Nahida is a more offensive option since she can provide higher buffs for Haitham than Baizhu can, and also she can use the prototype Ember weapon that allows her to heal the whole team when she uses her ultimate. It's no secret that I like this team a lot. I called it the best Haitham team and still believe that to this day. Furina's presence as the Hydra applier allows for the best balance between Hyper Blooms and quicken uptime, and the second part really makes Haitham's pure damage shine. If you don't bring a team-wide healer like Baizhu here, Furina's average buffing is not much ahead of Yelan's, but Haitham's pure damage is still significantly higher than on Yelan's teams, because in this case it gets to trigger many more spread reactions. I like to play this team in big rotations, around 30 seconds long, and that's because Furina's elemental skill has a very long uptime. This ties perfectly to the fact that, as I mentioned earlier in the video, Haitham can stretch his rotations as much as he wants. Naturally, in this case I'm talking about a split rotation with Haitham, so a scenario where you have 2 on-field windows with him. For the first window, you do the skill and plunge tech and stay on-field with him for around 4 or 6 seconds, then switch to the supports to reapply their abilities, and then back to Haitham to use his elemental burst and start the second window with new mirrors. In general, I really like the split windows on Haitham, especially in scenarios where you manage to defeat a wave in the first window, because then you can go back to your supports, regroup a bit, and start the second window strong. Lastly, the quicken teams. These are the teams where Haitham's personal damage is generally at its highest, since the quicken uptime on opponents is perfectly consistent. For this archetype, the composition I like the most is Cookie, Fischl, Nahida and Haitham. Cookie in particular is very important here, because she can heal, she can hold the instructor set and the subfood sword to provide elemental mastery buffs, and also she applies an Electro in a circle surrounding the active character, which means you won't have issues applying quicken in AoE scenarios. You can replace her with Baizhu, Zhongli, Yaya or Kirara, so you keep a defensive option anyway, but Again, I really like her Electro application here. You can also replace Nahida with one of the Dendro characters I just mentioned, so Baiju, Kirara or Yaya, and play a double offensive Electro core with Fischl and Yaya together. It's not bad, just strictly worse compared to Nahida compositions. Nahida really buffs Haitham a lot, and their damage is not insignificant either, so she's for sure the best Dendro flex slot. Now, in terms of builds, most of the stuff I'm going to say is kinda obvious. He's a Dendro character that benefits from Elemental Mastery, so Elemental Mastery Sands, Dendro Damage Bonus Goblet, and Crit Circlet. Energy-wise, he has a 70 cost burst, but he brings a second Dendron team pretty much always, so it doesn't need that much energy recharge. Usually, around 130 at most is fine. In terms of artifact sets, his best artifact in any scenario that doesn't include Furina is Gilded Dream. Otherwise, if you bring Furina on team, the best choice is the Marashusei set. Mixed options like double Elemental Mastery or Dendro Damage Bonus in Elemental Mastery are also pretty nice and not far from the Gilded Dream set. As for his weapons, Foliar, his signature, is still the best option for him without a single doubt. The best alternatives are all premium, them being Jade Cutter, Wolffang, the new Battle Pass weapon, Mist Splitter. The best cheap option is Harbinger of Dawn, the 3-star weapon. It has pretty low base attack, but of course that doesn't matter a lot for Haitham that scales off Elemental Mastery mainly. It's pretty great, and the only con is that Haitham needs to be above 90% HP for the passive to take effect. However, as long as you have a healer or a defensive option in general on team, this should be pretty trivial, even on Furina teams. Honestly, it's never been an issue for me. Lastly, regarding his Constellations, I would generally advise against going for Haitham's Constellations. They're not bad, but they definitely belong to an era of Genshin where Constellations were weaker in general. Honestly, if you want to increase Haitham's damage, you're much better off going for Nahida's Constellations or Furina's Constellations on his teams. And that's it. I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe and also go check the Chlorine guide I made a week ago. Bye bye.